If I asked you the subtle differences between royal blue, aqua, and teal, could you tell me? Of course you could. Now, when you were little, you had an 8-box of crayons, and it had your Roy G. Biv, your red, your orange, your yellow, your green, your blue, and your violet. When you got a little bit older and better with the coloring books, you went to the 16-box of crayons, then the 32-box of crayons. And then eventually you got to the motherlode of all crayon boxes with the 64 crayons in the box with a little sharpener in the back. But this is how you trained your eyes. In the same way, in these next 2 lectures, we're going to show you that original 8-box, starting with the noble white grape varieties. Now, I can hear some of you say already, I don't like white wine. I only like red, so I'm going to skip this lecture. If you do, you'll be doing yourself a big disservice. So why do I say this? Perhaps your new boss or new girlfriend is a Chardonnay fan. Actually, one of the grape varieties in here is the favorite of sommeliers. And another grape variety in here makes a wine that makes my eyes roll in the back of my head because I love it that much. I was showing some friends who only drink red wine not too long ago, and I showed them some white wines. And they were actually surprised because they found a new favorite among the whites. So I'd like you to keep an open mind because we're here to expand our horizons. Besides, you couldn't learn colors by skipping blue, green, or yellow, could you? Now, what does it mean to be a noble grape variety? Each of these grapes has a unique characteristic that is retained regardless of origin, from France to Chile, from California to Tasmania. They are some of the most popular grape varieties, which makes them really easy to find, and they're popular for a reason. They make a great range of wines at all price points, from entry-level ones to some of the highest quality wines in the world. They also have a tendency to age quite well, depending on where and how they're grown and where they're made. Now, not all varieties can do this. Many lose their distinctiveness when you take them out of their original indigenous environment. What this means to you is that once you understand their characteristics, and if you like them, they're not only easier to find, but you then can make comparisons and understand other wines. The 3 white noble grape varieties that we're going to be covering in this lecture is Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, and Chardonnay. These are Vitis vinifera grape varieties. Remember, this is the European grape variety that is well suited to wine. For this lecture, you should have the following wines to taste: a dry Riesling, preferably from Australia; a sweet Riesling, preferably from Germany, a Cabinet or Spätlese, as we have here; a Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc. We have here a Sancerre, but you may have a Puy-Fumé; a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc; a Chablis, as we had seen in other lectures, and an oaked Chardonnay. Now, you'll notice that for this lecture, I gave you a choice of wines, so that you'll have alternatives that might be easier for you to find where you live. Now, most of the time when we're tasting wine, I'll just refer to the particular one that I've got, but I'll also mention the general categories, such as dry Riesling. You may also want to have your guidebook or notes handy so that you'll know which one you should be tasting if you don't have the same ones that I've selected. We'll start with Riesling. Riesling is the wine experts and sommeliers' favorite grape. It has one of the widest, if not the widest, range when it comes to food and wine pairings. It can be dry to sweet, delicate and austere to positively luscious. It can be user-friendly to drink, now, yet it makes some of the longest-lived wines in the world because it has its bracing acidity, and it's almost always intensely aromatic. So let's take a look. Here we have a dry Riesling, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the oak Chardonnay just to give you a comparison, to show you how big the color difference is. So you're going to tilt the glasses on your white napkin, as we've done in other lectures, and you can really see that the color of the Riesling is very pale in comparison to the oaked Chardonnay. This is because Riesling is a thin-skinned grape variety. Now, when you look at it, in its core you see the color, but around its rim it almost looks watery. This might lead you to believe that it's dilute in flavor, but nothing could be further from the truth. So We were talking in the other lectures about how a cool climate gives a pale color, and Riesling does like cool climates. So now let's do our chest, chin, and nose test that we had discussed. All right, we're gonna put it our chest. Can you smell it? A little bit. Put it up to your chin. Oh, now I can definitely smell it. And then you put your nose in the glass. For this dry Riesling from Australia, I get a lot of lemon and lime fruits in there. Now we have a German Riesling, and what I'm going to do is do the same thing. This is even more aromatic than the other one. I also get very similar types of aromatics. However, it's more of a stone fruit, so more like nectarines and peaches and apricot. But this is the type of fruits that you get out of Riesling. Riesling has a thin skin, which means it will have a pale color, but it also can be easily infected by a fungal disease. There is a particular fungus called noble rot, which concentrates the sugars in the Riesling grapes without adversely affecting the flavors. When attacked by this fungus and made into a wine, Riesling can get a honey-like aroma, which can be reminiscent of dried apricot fruit and almonds. But more on that in Lecture 9. However, we should get one unique aroma out of the way: diesel. Yes, you heard me right, diesel, as in petrol, as in gas, or kerosene. As Riesling ages, it takes on a diesel or petrol-like aroma. And this is not a bad thing. We in the industry often look for that aroma. It adds aromatic lift to the wine, and many times it can be strikingly good. We see Riesling first appear in records from an invoice during the Middle Ages, in 1435, in Germany. But even back then, the quality was not disputed. And the fact that they got this grape variety to ripen so far up north speaks volumes for Riesling's flexibility. I have a question for you. Which one's stronger, a blade of grass or an oak tree? You might be tempted to say oak tree, but although a blade of grass is quite delicate and fragile, during a large storm, it's not the blade of grass that breaks from the strong winds, but it's the large oak tree that breaks. Riesling is like that blade of grass. Though it can be quite delicate, it has a strength and perseverance rarely found in wines. But how long can Riesling really age? It's a white wine, so it can't age as long as, let's say, a red Bordeaux, right? But before you answer, know that it's possible to taste German Rieslings from the end of World War II that are still in good condition. I mean, this doesn't necessarily mean only from the best vintages. And the reason why it can age so long is because of its high level of acidity. Now let's taste the dry Riesling. Remember, take a tablespoon or more in your mouth. And really roll it around. Many people think of Riesling as only sweet, but as you can see, this is a dry Riesling from Australia. And you can get Riesling in all different sweetness levels. But remember, this was definitely much more aromatically intense. And the types of fruits you get on the palate is the same as you got on the nose. Very lime, citrusy, but the fruit is very obvious. That's because it's a New World wine. Remember, anything outside of Europe is called the New World. And you can tell on the palate because its fruit is a bit more obvious. But you'll also notice that when you take it in your mouth, you feel the weight of it. It has a delicate body. Remember that whole skim milk, whole milk, and heavy cream analogy that we had done? Well, this has more towards maybe the skim milk end of the spectrum. And this is because it has a delicate body because it's from a cooler climate. And these are cues that it comes from a cooler climate, not only the delicate body, but also the higher level of acid. If you had noticed on the sides of your tongue that it was it's almost bracing. Now, in cool climates, Riesling has a hard wood in terms of what's around the vine. Now, this is the reason why it can do so well in cool climates and why it does well in cool climates all over the world. My grandmother was originally from the Bronx, and she still has a feisty, put-up-with-nothing kind of attitude, and I'll always remember her saying, You can take the girl out of the Bronx, but you can't take the Bronx out of the girl. Well, that's kind of like Riesling too. Not the Bronx part, but Riesling shows a sense of place. It does this by being able to adapt to so many different types of soils. If you grow it in the climate and the blue slate soils of the Mosel in Germany, it shows strong aromas of minerals and slate, and with a more delicate body, low alcohol, higher acidity, and that lemon and lime character we were talking about. However, in the nearby region of Rheingau, it's just a touch warmer, and the soils are different, so it takes on a more stone fruit character, a little higher alcohol, a little fuller body. Rarely do you see Riesling with any obvious oak flavor, as they generally don't see any oak during the fermentation or maturation process. However, in the Old World, you see Riesling fermented in large old oak vessels. But as we discussed in the last lecture, these fermentation vessels do not provide any flavor to the wine. So let's taste the German Riesling. Wow. You'll notice right away on the palate that it's sweet. But what about the acid? Because it's sweet, you might think, oh, it's not very high in acid at all. But really pay attention to the sides of your tongue. Your tongue will tell you if it's sweet. Because sometimes what happens is the sweetness that you get in wines will hide the acidity. But even as I'm talking, when it's been a few seconds, but even wait up to 30 seconds, how does it finish? Does it feel like you've been sucking on a lollipop? That's what we call cloying. But this Riesling isn't like that. Even though it's sweet, it finishes dry and prepares you for that next sip. Now, I hear some of you say, ew, it's sweet. It must be a lower quality wine. It's a common misconception. And we'll look at lecture number 9, and we're going to look at some absolutely gorgeous, nectar of the gods kind of sweet wines. But we'll discuss that later. However, for off-dry or delicately sweet wines, such as this German Riesling, while you're savoring it and determining length, notice how that dance between the sweetness and the acidity makes the flavors last longer and longer in your mouth. Now that we know the aromatic intensity, high acidity, and sweetness range of Riesling, we can make comparisons to other grape varieties. So let's go to Sauvignon Blanc. Here we have two. One from New Zealand and one from Sancerre, which is the Loire Valley in France. Notice, I'm going to pick both of these up and go to our white surface. Notice that these are very pale in color as well. Sauvignon Blanc really does like cool climates too, just like Riesling. However, when it's oaked, it can take on a deeper color and almost look like Chardonnay. But when you notice in the glass, you'll notice a little bit of besides the pale color, a little bit of a greenish hue to it. And that's very, very typical for Sauvignon Blanc. Now, Sauvignon Blanc can be as aromatically intense as Riesling and sometimes can be downright pungent, but its characteristics are quite different than Riesling. If you're a Cabernet Sauvignon fan, you may find it interesting that Sauvignon Blanc is the mother grape of Cabernet Sauvignon. Sometime around the 18th century, Sauvignon Blanc got together with Cabernet Franc and they produced Cabernet Sauvignon. Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon share something in common. Although Cabernet Sauvignon is red and Sauvignon Blanc is white, they both can be quite herbaceous, which means you will notice the aromas of herbs and something green with Sauvignon Blanc. This can range from fresh cut grass, that smell that you get when people are mowing lawns in the summer, to something a bit more asparagus-like. When I was studying wine and reading British books on wine, I saw a comment that Sauvignon Blanc smelled and tasted of gooseberries. In popular American culture, we don't really eat too many gooseberries, but if you want to get a better sense of what Sauvignon Blanc tastes like, especially in the cool climates like the Loire Valley, I recommend you go to a specialty fruit market and pick them up and taste them. If you can't find them, gooseberries can make, just to let you know, they can be really quite sour. And they make your mouth pucker, that whole... So, but you also get a green aroma and flavor. When Sauvignon Blanc gets quite ripe, you may taste less of the green herbaceous notes and more towards fresh, ripe melon notes. As we discussed in Lecture 2, some people can't find the chemical responsible for this green note. So if you can't get it in the glass, don't worry about it. There are other markers for Sauvignon Blanc that you may get that other people may not. The fruit characteristics of Sauvignon Blanc are in the citrus family. Lemon, lime, especially in cooler climates, but it can take on, like I said, a more melon and fresh fig kind of aromas in warmer climates such as the Napa Valley, or even passion fruit aromas in New Zealand. However, when you smell these wines, they all have a brightness in their uplifted aromatics that makes your mouth water when you smell it. Sauvignon Blanc can also show a sense of place, although it's not the blank canvas that Chardonnay is. In the regions of the Loire Valley in France, and particularly in the region of Pouilly-Fumé, their Sauvignon Blancs are so mineral that they can remind you of gunflint, which is my marker when I'm tasting blind. If you have a Pouilly-Fumé, smell it first, then smell your New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and then go back to your Pouilly-Fumé. You might have purchased a Sancerre, which is what we have here. So you might not get the whole gunflint as much as in the Pouilly-Fumé, but you'll notice how mineral-like it is. This is a clear giveaway that Sauvignon Blanc shows a sense of place, and that's why Sauvignon Blanc is a noble grape variety. On the palate, Sauvignon Blanc has incredible finesse. As we discussed in Lecture 2, finesse is an elegance or lack of coarseness that you get in wine. Now let's taste the Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc. Here we have a Sancerre. Put it to your chest. You can actually smell it from there. Chin and your nose. Wow, I get the fruit is a little bit more subdued, but I do get lemon and citrus notes in there, and I do definitely get some fresh cut grass. All right, now to the palate. You'll notice that Sauvignon Blanc is a little bit weightier, a little bit fuller than Riesling, but the acidity is still really quite high. And if you have problems tasting acidity, taste the Sancerre, go to the Chablis or the Oaked Chardonnay, and then come back to the Sancerre. You're going to feel it on the sides of your mouth, and you're going to pucker a little bit. But this acidity makes Sauvignon Blanc an incredible food pairing wine. Remember my epiphany with the salmon and the Sancerre. It makes everything finish clean, but in its finish, you still have that lingering note of mineral. Now, unlike Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc can handle some oak treatment. For example, the Sauvignon Blancs from the high-quality region of Pessac-les-Oignons in Bordeaux, which we'll talk about more in detail in Lecture 10. But it's known for being oaked there. If you liked oaked Chardonnays, you may want to broaden your horizons, and you may enjoy these wines for their vanilla notes and aromatic lift. Sauvignon Blanc is a good sharer and tends to blend well with other grape varieties, such as it does in Bordeaux. Unlike Riesling, which tends to like only cool climates, Sauvignon Blanc can stand slightly warmer climates. It has a much wider range. Now, while Sauvignon Blanc in some areas may have racy acidity like Riesling and can stand up to oak like Chardonnay, it doesn't have the capacity to age, unfortunately, as long as either of them. However, it's a real shining star in its youth for its vibrancy and all that fruit. Okay, now let's move on to Chardonnay. Chardonnay is one of my absolute favorite grape varieties, if not my favorite grape variety. It's so prolific, it can grow practically anywhere and still retain its characteristics. It makes sparkling wines and it makes still wines. And you can buy Chardonnay at any price point. As you may have guessed, some of the highest quality examples from Burgundy are the ones that make my eyes roll in the back of my head because I just enjoy them so much. If my husband ever tries to really get on my good side, he brings home a white Burgundy, which is Chardonnay. Now, if you've ever heard yourself saying, "I don't like Chardonnay," well, perhaps you haven't tasted the right one. Now we're going to compare the Chardonnays. We have an unoaked Chardonnay here from Chablis, and we have an oaked Chardonnay from Chile. When you compare the two colors together, you're definitely going to notice that the oak Chardonnay is definitely deeper. But that's not only because it's from a warmer climate, but it's also because of the oak. But Chardonnay in general has a deeper color. Now let's smell. Here, I really don't get anything there. Put it up at your chin. Still don't get a whole heck of a lot. This is one of those grape varieties that you're actually just going to have to stick your nose in the glass. Chardonnay is actually known for being a neutral grape variety, so it's not as aromatically intense as the others. However, what you get in Chablis, as well as you get in Chardonnay all around the world, is an apple-like aroma. And in Chablis, it can take on more of a Granny Smith green apple kind of note. And in California or Chile, it can take on more tropical fruit tones, let's say like pineapple. Now let's taste these. Now right away, I noticed that the acidity in the Chablis is much softer than the other wines that we've tasted previously. Now, even though it's more delicate in body, and it probably is the most delicate body for Chardonnay in its entire spectrum, but it's still softer in its acidity than any of the other grape varieties. Now let's taste the Chilean Chardonnay. Oh, the acidity there is almost low. Remember we were talking about the word blousy? The acidity is quite low here, but you've got the pronounced fruit coming out. But it is a little bit low. But you'll notice how soft it appears in comparison to the others. So if you're not a huge acidity fan, you're going to like that wine a lot. Now, Chardonnay grows practically everywhere, which is the reason why you see it everywhere. And actually, it might, if you planted it in the rug here, it might grow. I mean, it's quite prolific. And it's one of the best at showing where it's from. We are looking at Chablis. When you taste Chablis, you taste where it's from because it has a chalk-like note to its aromatics and its taste. Now, if you travel a little bit further south within Burgundy to a region called Meursault, it takes on a hazelnut kind of aroma. The chalk goes away and the hazelnut comes out. It's quite fascinating. But these are not coincidences. Chardonnay is a blank canvas. It shows where it's grown through the flavors and the structure of the wine. For example, in this Chilean Chardonnay that we have here, you can almost literally taste the sunshine in its warmer climate. Now, in terms of winemaking, Chardonnay can handle a fair amount of manhandling. For example, many Chardonnays go through a process called malolactic fermentation. It's caused by a bacterium called lactobacillus, and it turns the malic acid in the wine, which is the acid you find in green apples, to lactic acid, which is the acid you find in milk. This process happens after alcoholic fermentation. But during ML, which is what we call it in the industry, another chemical is produced called diacetyl. This chemical actually tastes of butter. So if you've ever tasted a Chardonnay that had a buttery kind of aroma, or you've ever heard, oh, this wine tastes of butter, there's a reason for that. I mean, taste the Chilean Chardonnay again. Chances are you will get that creamy, buttery note to the wine. This likely means that it had either total ML or partial ML done to it. The creamy texture that you get may be also coming from lees stirring. What's lees stirring? Well, at the bottom of the fermentation or maturation vessel, there are dead yeast cells, skin fragments, and other things that fall to the bottom. This whole sediment is called lees. When it's stirred up during the maturation process, the yeast cells break down and create a rich, creamy texture and also a weight. In French, they call the whole stir process of lees stirring bâtonnage, and we'll review this more when we get to Burgundy Lecture 11. However, Chardonnay is one of the rare white grape varieties that shows complexity through lees stirring, and it adds something to the wine. You totally couldn't do this with Riesling. Lastly, Chardonnay can handle a fair amount of oak. When it's fermented in old oak, it can take on a further roundness in its character. And with new oak barriques, it can smell of sweet vanilla, nutmeg, spice, and even buttered toast. I swear, sometimes I'll taste some Chardonnays and I think I'm tasting baked apple pie. I mean, you can even tasting the flaky crust in there. I mean, it's not sweet like the pie, but you get all of those aromas and flavors as if you were tasting apple pie. When Chardonnay structure is right, it can last for absolute decades. We'll discuss this more in Lecture 7, but Chardonnay is one of the reasons why vintage champagne can last so long. And as Chardonnay ages, it gets more caramel and nut-like and gains richness and weight and complexity. This chart shows you a summary of what we've just discussed. It shows you the weight and richness. That's why this circle is much bigger for Chardonnay. And it also shows you the delicateness of Riesling and how aromatically intense that it is. And also shows you that Sauvignon Blanc kind of falls in the middle. Now I want to bring your attention to the shape of the bottles that we have here. Notice that each one of them has its own shape. Here we have elongated bottles, and this is for Riesling. You generally find Riesling in this type of bottle. And then you have, let's say for the Burgundy, for Chablis, you have these sloping shoulders. In Bordeaux, you'll see Sauvignon Blanc have a Bordeaux-like bottle, which has high shoulders. Now, when tasting wine, and if you're tasting with some of your friends, you may want to hide the shape of the bottle because it can give them an opportunity to cheat. When I was studying with some MW candidates, we had to hide the bottles because we didn't want anything influencing our identifications. And there we have it. We have our beginning 3 crayons in the box. Did you see how vastly different the white wines can taste and how each one is unique? Now, you may not have personally enjoyed every single wine, enough to call up your local store and order a case. However, I hope you can walk away with appreciating the individual grape variety for what it is, as we'll be encountering these wines later on. This also helps provide the basis to make comparisons with wines we will taste from all over the world. Now, in our next lecture, we will cover the noble red grape varieties. Pinot Noir. I prefer a Bourgogne Rouge, but you can get a New World Pinot Noir, a Northern Rhone Syrah. Here we have a Crozes Hermitage, but Hermitage or Côte Rôtie would work. A basic Bordeaux, which is what this is. Or you can get a California Merlot, as long as it's 100% Merlot. And then a Chilean Cabernet Sauvignon. You will see these grape varieties all over the world. And by understanding them here, you'll be adding them to the Rolodex of grape varieties, which you've come to understand here, and it'll allow you to make easier comparisons in later lectures. Until then, I think I'm just going to have a white wine.